Hey everyone, we are about to start. Welcome again to another webinar in a series of the MoMinis Studio webinars. I'm going to make it short and just give the stage to Asaf, who is leading the webinar. Asaf, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Asaf, as I have presented. I'm a developer here at MoMinis, and today we're going to have an intermediate level studio webinar. That means just more advanced topics than the beginner's level. Okay, so let's begin. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is start up our studio and see the project we're going to be running today. Let's wait for a few seconds. Just wanted to say that if you're not familiar with the studio, stay with us because I'm sure you'll learn a few tricks and pick up right on because it's quite self-explanatory. So here's the studio. It's loading. There we are. Okay. Our project today will have a few features we didn't have in our previous project. We'll have pause feature. We'll have a custom menu. Let's see it. That's the studio for those of you who are only familiar with it. So here's our project. We press new game, and then we have this little orb which responds to our touches on the screen and just follows our finger. If we touch any of the walls, we start again. And the goal is to make it all the way to that small spiral up here. As you can see, I already paused the game and I can start the game. Okay, let's begin. First, I want to talk about something really important regarding our contest. I want to introduce our Get to Mobile service and just explain some principles about using our service and SVN, Subversion, which is a version control system. So let's enter our website, contest.mominis.com. I'm going to log in. If you haven't logged in or registered, you just do that. It's free and very easy. So I'm logged in, and here on the top we have our Get to Mobile button. Just press it, and we can see our games. I'm going to create a new game and show you how to add it to our repository. A repository is a place on the web. It's kind of like Dropbox, but with better features suited for those who develop games or having files that change on a regular basis. If you need more help regarding Subversion, just go to the web. There's plenty of information. I'll explain in brief the core principles. Well, the first thing we have to do is know where our SVN is located, and we have a URL for this. So we take the URL and just check it out to some folder. Create a folder, let's call it mobile, and I installed the tool called Tortoise SVN. Tortoise SVN is an integration tool between Windows and the Subversion API or subsystem. So I have some extra features here, and what we're going to use is Subversion Checkout. We have our URL open here, so we're just going to use it. A few seconds later, we download our data from the repository, from the remote repository, and right into our hard drive. Great. So that's the project we're gonna work on.
So these projects, basically, you have prepared them beforehand, before the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm just gonna create a new one and show you how to create and integrate a new project with your Subversion repository. So what I'm gonna do is just open up our well-known studio and create a new game in this folder.
Now the idea is to create the game from the get-go and not to use only the feature for Get to Mobile, for instance, but also for storage and backups and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, the main advantage of Subversion, of working with Subversion, is you have a version control system which saves your history. So you can revert back to a previous version if you have some changes, if you somehow broken your game or have some features you don't want to use, and so you want to go to the older version, you have everything in there, as well as some documentation on the changes you made. I'll show you in a brief. So project will be here. Let's see, on C mobile. Let's call it our game. Studio knows that there is no such folder, and it asks us if we want to open a new game, so we do. And now we have a new folder here. What we're going to do is add that folder to our remote repository. We do that by right-clicking it and just adding it in the Tortoise SVN submenu. So now we select all the files, of course, and now it's added. But it's only added here on our computer, so we have to synchronize it with our remote repository on the web. So we do that by using the commit function, which is let's say it's the most important function Subversion has. And we just write a small remark about what we did, and added our game, and press OK. And now everything is uploaded to the server. So we created a new folder. We told SVN that we want this folder monitored, and we just committed our changes. So now it monitors it from the remote repository. We wait a few seconds, let it finish, and that's it. You can see the little check mark here. That means it's synchronized. And if we're going to go to the mobile site and just refresh it, we'll see our new project right here. You can see also that this project says never compiled, and our project is compiled. Compile means use our compiler, our service, to create a game suitable for your mobile Android device. Let's compile our small little game, which is right now empty. And I'm gonna download my previous game and show you how it runs on a device. It takes a few minutes, so I compiled it in advance, so you will not have to wait until the process is finished. Project weighs in about 6 megabytes. It's quite okay. And now you are going to see me running this game on a device. So we have our game. We just install it. Second, just gonna install it on our device. It's here in our downloads folder. Just for some reason it doesn't want to install right now. Just gonna, this process is stuck. So okay. Our game is compiled, and I'm gonna show you. Hi everyone, this is me, your host. As you can see, this is the device I'm holding. It's connected, and we already installed our game here, and this is the second icon here. It's called Intermediate, I'm just going to run it, and you can see this is our game. I know it's not really, the screen is too bright, but that's a small orb responding to clicks and touches. So that's in brief the Get a Mobile service. Just upload your game and you can just see it compiled. Okay, now let's create a new game from scratch. So we have a new studio with our game. Let's create it. I'm just going to switch back to the studio screen. There we go. So we have an empty project. The first thing we're going to do, and this is the first thing we're going to do with every project, no matter what we're going to do with it, is test our gameplay mechanics. Just create a little idea and know how our game plays, how it looks. So the first thing we want to do is create a small orb, small ball, which will just follow our finger. So let's create a sprite. Let's call it hero, because that's our hero, our main character, and it will have single animation. Let's call it below. I already have my graphics ready. It has 8 frames. Just select those pictures and add them. Let's give about 80 milliseconds between each frame and see our game. Yeah, that look right. That look okay. Looks fine. And we have our new hero. So let's add it to our room and see it live. Have a new game. Yes, that's our hero. First, we're going to change our resolution, our device orientation to be portrait, and to be landscape instead of portrait, because it's just that more convenient when playing. That's our game. That's our ball. Just wanted to follow our finger, and to do that, we're going to add some events. Now, to add events, as you all know, we go to the Logic tab, and just remember that just add the events we want. So the first event we want to add is touch. So when we start touching the screen, not the object, but the entire screen, we want something to happen. We want the ball to move in the direction of our finger. So let's set its speed. So our speed will be about, let's say, where the touch was, minus our position. And the same thing goes with the y, but inverted, because, as you remember, the positive y-axis goes downwards. And so, I'll show you first what happens now. Okay, it goes right in our direction. Actually, we didn't have to invert the y because it already knows that the y is inverted and it inverts it for us. But we want to drag the finger and have it follow us. So we add a new touch event. When the touch is moved, just create the same logic. So we can just copy paste, but that's not a really good idea. We want one place where this logic will be implemented. So we create a custom event with 2 arguments, let's say x and y, and we call it move to. So now, instead of calculating the new speed ourselves, we just move it to our move to. Quite the same. And here have our course, we need to change the invocation, so we can, instead of creating it, just call this event called the move to function with x as the touch x and y as the touch y. We just copy and paste this logic to our move, and let's see our game. As you can see, the ball follows us, but if we keep our finger in the same place, it doesn't accelerate towards us. Well, that's because the new event, the move event, only occurs when the actual location of the move, of the touch, is moved. So if the finger stays in the same place, it doesn't register a new event. So I want to change that by using a small property. If you remember, properties are like variables for each instance of our sprite. We add a numeric property which called is screen touched. It's defaulted to 0, and when the screen is touched, we are gonna change the property value to 1, which means true. That's a nice convention. 0 means false and 1 means true. And when we finish touching our screen, just set it back to 0. So now we have a touch state, and we don't want to invoke that logic directly. We just want to save the state, and with each frame, when each frame starts, we're gonna test our variable. So we have an if action, which I know I've talked about in the previous webinar, but I haven't shown you. So if self is screen touched equals 1, only if it equals 1, we're going to call this event, call the move to event with x as. Actually, we don't have the x and y values, so we're going to save them to a different property. We call them temp because they're not really, there's temporary variables, we just need them for each iteration. So there we are, go to the logic and just set another property. X will get touch X and Y will get touch Y. The same goes when we move, and now our move to argument will get in X and Y and just use them the same, but our frame now has our logical frame event now has the data from the previous touch. So we call an event, move to event, we could have used the values directly in our custom event, the temp1 and temp x, but I want to show you how we use variables, how we use arguments for custom events and use them as functions. So now you can see that it's a bit different. So now we have our small orb touching our, but as you see, it actually slows down as it moves towards our hand. That's because the speed value decreases. So we want to add a small change and click the relative checkbox. This means that right now our speed will be added to our existing speed, but now it will be too fast. So we just divide it by a known factor, and that's our movement. Just divide it, let's say by 20. You can just tweak this value as you want, and now you can see it accelerating. Great, exactly what we wanted. Okay, so we have our moving ball, and we want to sometime like add some obstacles to it to make the game a bit more interesting. So we create our capability called obstacle. You can choose whatever name you want, but I choose the prefix of capital C to my capabilities, so I can differentiate them from sprites. So an obstacle, and we add some sprites. Let's call it blank horizontal big. Actually, this capability doesn't define any logic, but we don't want any logic defined. We just want to unify all the obstacles under one family. So we add a new animation, blank, and just add an image. Right now we're just creating our main and basic building blocks. This is the same as the previous webinar, but we're going to soon add some really advanced features. New sprite, blank, horizontal, small, quite the same. Simply add content to our game. You can just copy these. Actually, now I'm going to create a new one from scratch because that's the great way to do it. Big. Be sure to always work with some ordering, so you always know what your project does, what your object does, because if things get messy, you'll find it's very hard to find problems and fix them. And these are all our obstacles. So in about a minute, we just added 4 different types of obstacles. And now, when our hero collides with any of the obstacles, that's why we have the capability, we want things to happen. Let's say, go back to our main room. Great, so actually we want to add obstacles to our game. Let's go, let's add a few obstacles. And why didn't it work? We need to choose, we didn't mark these as obstacles. So always be sure to mark your objects with the capabilities they are. And as you can see, we collided and we return to our main screen. So now we have our basic gameplay logic, but the thing we want to do is add some levels. We want to add a new level and just call it level 2, rename this to level 1, and reorder them. The ordering is important with rooms because this is the between next and previous rooms. And the second level we just have a different one, let's say. And so now we want to add an ending, an endpoint to our game. Let's create a new sprite, let's call it endpoint. simple sprite, only one animation. See it, very nice. And we're gonna add it to our level. Let's say here. Thing is, I'm gonna show you now a new feature which we have already mentioned but haven't really seen in the previous webinar, which is called instance properties. Instance properties is a special kind of property. Let's see it. It's a special kind of property which enables us to save instances of different game objects. Let's call it endpoints. And now this property, which is limited to hold only endpoint type of objects, will list objects which this hero object needs to know about. Let's say let's do something like that and add only this instance property to our hero. Choose only this one, and now we're going to define a new event. When we collide with our endpoint property, we want to end the game or move to the next level. So when I'm colliding with my instance property, I want to go to our next room. Let's see it happening. So I'm colliding with this and nothing happens, but only when I collide with the topmost property, we have our action invoked. So that's the thing about instance properties. They're very useful. That's how each instance knows about stuff only they should know about, and not just the entire type of sprite. Okay, so our screen, as you can see, looks a little bland. Just this small simple menu, and we want to change it because it's not a really attractive menu. And each of our games, if you ever play them, you can see that they have very elaborate menus, very decorative ones, that make them individual and unique. So let's create our own menu. The first thing we have to do is go to our game properties, which is located up here in the ribbon, and click Use Custom Menus. Selecting this option will cause our game to discard the regular menu, and we just replace it with our own logic. Don't worry, it's really simple. So now, just disable the menu. As you can see, the menu doesn't really show anymore. It's just a regular room. Let's change this room's background, make it a bit more vital and alive. Alright, great. Now we want to add some buttons. To add a button, we just add a capability. The reason for adding a capability and not just implementing the button is because we know that buttons they all share the same logic, but every button does something a bit different. So our button has 3 animations. It should look how it should look clicked, how it should look like it's normal, and how it should look like when it's disabled. We have animations, but we keep them empty. That's because we want our sprites to inherit those animations and define them themselves. Let's create our new game button and make it a button. You can see in our resources tab that we have these animations, but these animations are locked, first of all, and have no images in them. Actually, I want to change the ordering of the animations, so the normal animation will be the default one. And disabled. So now we have those animations. Set this one as the default animation, and we just populate it with, so that's the normal, that's the clicked, that's our disabled image. Let's add some logic, common logic to all buttons. So when we have our, first of all, they all should have a property called isActive, which is setting which is it's disabled or not. Let's actually call it it's enabled. That's more readable. And I'll start with 1. Okay. And we want it to respond to touch events. So when the game object is first touched, if it's active, we want to change the animation to the clicked animation. And when the touch ends, if it's enabled, we want to change the animation to normal again. And we have another event called disable and the one called enable. We just set the property of is enabled. The enable event sets it to 1 and the disable sets it to 0. They also change the animation. Enable will cause it to have the normal animation, and disable will cause it to have a disabled animation. So let's add our small button to our game. We want to change its size a bit. Let's see what's the real size. Well, it's about 400 and 176. So just change it. That's when we change the size. 400, 176. We can resize any sprite we want to resize. And our level is now updated with the new event, with the new button. As you can see, we have a button which is clickable. Let's add sign. Just have a little pole and stick a button over it. A bit more cozy now. Our button will define its own logic, and when it's touched, the game object is touched, you just go to the next room. So now when we touch this, just start our game. So that's in brief how we create our own menu system. Now we're going to create a new feature which is really useful, and that's called the pause feature. In the real world, we sometimes get a call or someone talks to us, so we have to pause our game for a second to see something. And up until now, we haven't had the chance to pause our games and respond to events outside our world. Our studio enables us to create the pause logic very easily and just respond to those touch events, to those pause events. So now we're going to create a small sprite which helps us control our game when it's paused. The first thing we're going to do is create a new capability called unfreezable. This will come in handy later. I'm just going to explain you in a bit. And we're going to create a new sprite. Let's call it pauser or pause manager. We don't really need any logic for this, any graphics for this one. Just want it to look like something we'll identify. So when our pause manager is created, the first thing we're going to do is make it invisible. We're also going to create a new button called the pause button. As you can see, creating buttons now is really easy because everything is simply already defined for us because of our capability. So now we're just going to change so this is normal, this is the clicked, and that's the disabled. And our capability just manages these animations and switches them as you need. We're going to create a touch event, and when the touch ends on that object, we're just going to create a new instance of our pause manager. When our pause manager is created, we're just gonna add some logic to it. When it's created, it's supposed to pause the game. So we have an action for this called freeze the game. And we're gonna freeze everything except unfreezables. That's why we have this capability. So the first thing we're going to do is make ourselves invisible, and then we're going to freeze the game except any unfreezable types. And now we're going to create a new button called the pause button, not the resume button actually. Which will be shown when the game is paused. So, as we know, it's a button. You can see how useful this button capability is. It's a button. We're gonna change it to normal. Pause. It doesn't really have a disabled image, so we're gonna use the same image here. It's not going to use anywhere. And when and just change its size to the real size. That's the real size. Now we're going to create a new button. You'll immediately see that there is a problem with this because our button will be created, but it will be paused. So it won't work. I'm just going to show you this so you understand what I'm talking about. We want to create it in the center of the screen. So to do that, are just going to use this simple logic. It simply divides the difference between those, the width and height of the screen, by 2, and use it as the location for our dialog. Of course, we're going to add a new pause button to our game. Set it right here in the corner. So now the game is paused. You can see the animation stopped, but this doesn't work. And this is where timers come into play. The timer is an object which every sprite has, and it can just perform logic on a delayed time. When the pause manager is created, we don't want it to create a new instance right away. We just want it to create a timer in the next iteration. So we give it 1 millisecond, which just say that you don't have to do anything in this iteration, just defer everything to the next iteration, game iteration, because a game runs in a loop. So in the next frame, next iteration of frame, this event will occur because we just started the timer. So in this timer, in this event, we're going to create an instance of our resume button. We're also going to update it a bit with a text frame. A text frame is a place where you can hold your text. Let's call it click to resume. Just change the font. You can use your own fonts. And make it transparent. And change the color to, let's say, dark brown. And let's see it in action. So now, as you can see, our pause manager would just defer the creation of the pause event, of the pause button, to the next iteration. So now, just need to create our set position. Actually, it doesn't work. Let's see what we did wrong. So it's a bit weird because everything looks, probably have a small error here. So I'm just going to open my ready project and show you how it's done there. Just going to wait a few seconds, let everything open, and I'll show you the implementation on our project. You can see it loading. same structure. We have our pause generator. When it's created, makes itself invisible using a custom event in this instance, and it's quite the same. So let's see it running. Just click and everything is paused. So when we click the game, when we click the button, we can see that this button simply unfreezes the game, calls the unfreeze game action, and just destroys itself. So when it unfreezes the game, everything just returns to normal and it's eliminated from the screen. In our spare time, I'm going to touch a few points which are really important for everyone who wants to create a new and exciting game, and also avoid some common mistakes. First, I'm going to talk about capability inheritance. The thing is that you can also inherit from different sprites. Let's see. You can see that I can inherit from other sprites. The only difference between sprites and capabilities in inheritance is that sprites already define animations and have to populate them with images and frames, and capabilities do not. So when you arrive at the point when you need to inherit from a sprite, just rethink and see if you can change it to inherit from a capability, because in most cases you want to inherit from a capability. Another thing is the variables. We have some variables here which can be used and interpolated by just calling an action called setGlobalVariable. With these variables we can just create whatever we want and save whatever data we want to remain in the game between changes. In this instance, I just created a variable for level 1 and level 2, and every time I finish a game I just change the correct variable. By doing this, I can return to the right state and save past progress. So when the game is loaded, the variables are loaded as well, and you can just, in your level selection screen, if you implement any, you can just enable the levels that the user already finished. I'm going to talk to you about our next studio version, some features we're going to have in our next version. Well, the first feature is something we've been missing for a long time, and that's the ability to rotate a sprite. We will be able to rotate a sprite using just an angle and a pivot point. Just have to choose your point, and the sprite will rotate around that point. We can also scale sprites, so we can make them bigger or smaller, and just don't have to create new sprites for slightly different sizes. We can also color sprites. We can change their tint, their hue of their color hue, make a sprite redder or greener or bluer or whatever you want. And we will also have a new collision mechanism which will enable you to specify canvas rectangles and just collide against these rectangles. You can just choose whatever rectangle you want to collide with, and you will collide with the rectangle instead of the whole sprite. And of course, pixel level collision will be deprecated, so just don't use it. And that's our webinar. If you have any questions, I'm here and I'll be happy to answer you. I've seen a question, what's the difference between all the different type of variables? Well, I'm going to explain every type of variable. Game variable is a local variable for this iteration only, for this run. So when you're going to exit the game, the variable will be reset to its default value. A persistent variable is quite the same as cloud. Its value will be stored on your device, but when the game updates or something will change, the variable will be deleted. And you don't want that usually, because games do get updated and content is added all the time. So we're just going to use cloud variables, which are quite the same, but they remain between versions, and you can also they're always loaded. The word cloud is a bit misleading because they will also be saved and loaded if you are offline. Let's say you don't have an internet connection, those variables will still be persistent and loaded and saved, and they will work the same as a persistent variable. Any other question? Our next version, someone asked us about our next version. In about a month, we'll release a new studio version. Just stay tuned and visit our website. And when the new version will be out, we'll just announce it.
Just a few words about the next version. As you all know, it's going to contain rotation and scaling and tinting and things that you probably need in order to create your game. And we also wanted to create games using those features. We hopefully will be able to release this version in the early days of December, but it might be prolonged just a bit. So I don't want to disappoint you in any way. What I can assure you is that you will be able to create games that require these capabilities in the studio. So what I advise in the meantime is just to go ahead and create all the other features and leave the things that require scaling, rotation, and stuff like that towards the later stages of the content. I hope that helps. Okay, I think that our time is up, and also I don't see any other questions. So if something comes up at a later stage, please, you know where to find us. Just put it in the phone or just send us an email. Asaf, thank you very much for this great webinar. Guys, we're going to put it online so you can all enjoy it. And if you missed something or join in the later stage of the webinar, you can find it there. Asaf, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening.
And again, I wish you all good luck in the contest and hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.